Burkina Faso's government abandoned 600 children, most under 10, in Cuba, and this is the heartbreaking story of what happened. But interestingly, most people have never heard about this fascinating story, especially the country's deep brotherly ties with Cuba. You see, when Captain Thomas Sankara was assassinated, all that remained was his grieving family, a nation's and continent's broken dreams, plus 600 orphans in Cuba. But in my opinion, when the visionary captain took power through a military coup in 1983, it marked the country's only true independence, one that genuinely cared about its people. Listen, the man was a leader who believed that quality education was vital to a revolution, emphasizing that schools should empower children to be self-reliant, to believe in themselves, and to cherish independence rather than dependency on others. So when the Caribbean nation of Cuba, led by the revolutionary El Comandante Fidel Castro, offered scholarship to students from Burkina Faso to go study there, where they already had more than 20 schools specially organized to welcome foreign students. Captain Sankara seized the opportunity with both hands. And in 1986, Captain Sankara sent over 600 children, most under 10 years old, who had lost one or both parents, to equip them with the necessary tools not only to survive in life, but above all, to later contribute to their country's development. But here's the interesting thing. Many of the children had never left their villages, let alone the country, yet one day they embarked on a long journey to a completely different land, one with a new culture and language. Now, due to the political context of the time, the children had received a revolutionary education, which included learning a trade and military training on the side. But a few months later, after their arrival in Cuba, Captain Sankara paid them a visit, shook the hands of all the 600 children, and told them how much he needed their support to build a greater and better Burkina Faso. You see, this small yet meaningful gesture reassured them, inspiring and motivating the youth to give their best for their country and for the captain who believed in them. Listen, for an ordinary citizen on the African continent, even meeting ministers such as Minister of Agriculture or Sport is nearly impossible, let alone meeting the president. And when you see the presidential motorcades, which I have seen plenty in different countries across the continent, you don't even know which car to look because there are way too many unnecessary vehicles. And personally, I think I have better chances of seeing someone empty the Atlantic Ocean with a teaspoon before I ever shake hands with an active African president. Regardless of the country, I really don't mind. By the way, while all this was happening, Captain Ibrahim Traoré had not even been born yet. But back to the story. In October 1987, when Captain Thomas Sankara's life was brutally ended by troops led by Blaise Compaoré, one of his closest friends, and at the time he was the country's first minister, and it was him who had signed the official papers for the children to leave for Cuba. Now, keep that in mind because it's very important to this story. Anyways, initially, the Cubans did not want to officially tell the children that the captain had been assassinated. But eventually, 6 days later, they broke the news to them. However, remember, these were orphans already carrying the pain of losing their parents. Now, add to that the fact that they were far away from the continent and their families in the African sense, and now they had lost the very man who had given them a purpose, a seat in his vision to build a greater and better country. So as you can imagine, a devastating and unbearable grief settled in the heart of these young children, leaving them feeling abandoned, anxious, and alone all over again. I mean, this was despite the efforts of Cuban's teachers and educators to try to comfort them. But worse, these children were ostracized from their country because the new government feared they would seek vengeance, especially since they had received military training in Cuba. So as a result, the Compaorés government did everything in their power to make sure their lives was a living hell. They could no longer send or receive letters from their families for over 2 years. And they also suspended all fundings for their program in Cuba, leaving them entirely dependent on the Caribbean nation, which was already under all kinds of US embargo. And to make matters worse for the youth, at one point they were nearly repatriated, but Fidel Castro was firmly opposed to that idea and took care of them until they all completed their studies. You see, in my opinion, Africa's debt to Cuba is one of the few acceptable debts the continent will never be able to repay. Even worse, we have not even begun considering making an attempt to match or surpass Cuba's efforts. Because after all, how many African countries do you know are actively campaigning for the end of sanctions, the unfair sanctions against Cuba with the same energy Cuba stood up for Africa when supporting African liberation struggles came at a cost? Anyhow, they eventually returned home but were marginalized, where many struggled to find work because they were known as Sankara's orphans from Cuba. But this was not the welcome they would have received under the captain's leadership. A man who actually had a vision and a plan to put their acquired skills and talent to good use. Instead, they were overlooked by a guilty, insecure, and criminal government that clearly had no plan for the country. Look, they they wanted power, but once they had it, they didn't know what to do with it. And by the way, all these stories are told by the very people who experienced them. There is a whole documentary about this called Les Orphelins de Sankara, which means Sankara's orphans. And if you are interested, let me know in the comment section and I'll put you in the right direction with one that has English subtitles. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I appreciate your support.
We, ni nini?